People said that these are a red race. They're not really Africans, they're brown Mediterraneans. Why? Because the Egyptians had a habit of coloring red, putting red ochre on men and yellow ochre on women. And nobody seemed to realize through anthropology that the Africans had been doing that for thousands of years. Red represents vitality, so you put red ochre on men. Yellow represents fertility, you put yellow ochre on women. It doesn't mean the women are yellow and the men are red. Look at this. Just for this alone, you should buy this book. It shows you how the Egyptian represented himself. This is Egyptian, black. This is the Indo-European or Caucasian. This is the Nubian and other blacks of Africa. And this is the Semite. He makes it quite clear. This is the one that survives the centuries, where he paints it clearly, because now he's not dealing with symbolic colors. Since he's representing all the races, he wants to show you in minute detail who is who in his world. Sheikh Anta Diop brought that to our attention, but Sheikh Anta Diop published it in black and white. I spent a lot of money to get that in color because I didn't want any mistake. I want it to be seen clearly. You cannot see this clearly in black and white. You have to see it in color. It's the only one that survives from Egypt. This book is filled with about 200 photographs. And you will see the pharaohs, and you will see their queens, and you will see the scribes, and you will see the vast concentration of black African faces. It is true that Egypt was not homogeneous. It had other people as well. Since it had borders open, other people trickled in. They weren't all black. But look at Britain. Britain has 1 million blacks. They've trickled in. Would you say Britain is black? If the major figures, the dominant figures are black, the major population is black, because a few people trickle in, that's a black population. It's a black civilization. There are more blacks in Britain than in my country. But does that make Britain black? They're going to pick the odd little figure here and there because the king sometimes married outside. A king is supposed to bring as many people into his harem as possible, not only necessarily in his own nation. Sometimes if he has quarrels and fights with other people, or he wants to make alliances, you bring other people into the harem. So the odd figure may appear. And then it even becomes more so during the later dynasties when there are invasions. Egypt was invaded by many people. It was invaded by the Hyksos around 1660 BC, and for 150 years there are no black pharaohs until the blacks threw the Hyksos out of the place. And then came the Persians under Cambyses around 520 BC, ravaging all before them, laying flat the capital of the blacks, smashing noses and breaking up statues and temples. And then came the Greeks, who respected the African, even though they conquered him. Those were the major great Europeans who began to take African geometry, African medicine, African calendar. Who do you think created the day for us? You hear about Greeks and Romans. The Greeks and Romans turned it around, but where did they initially get it? The Mesopotamians and the Greeks. They did not measure the day as 365 and a quarter days. They did not know it was so accurate. They had 364 and 365 day years until the Egyptians, with their precise astronomy, established that the year was actually 365 and a quarter days. But the Africans introduced a leap year. We no longer have a leap year, by the way. We call it a leap year. It's just a leap day. Every 4 years we adjust our time by putting an extra day in February, whereas the Egyptians adjusted it by adding a whole year every 1,460 years to make it more correct. They were then left with 365 days. Do you know, they took out 5 days of the year, which we still celebrate. We don't even know where that comes from. Why does everybody get wild in the last 5 days of the year? The Egyptians did that. It starts with December the 25th, which Africans call the day of Horus. Horus is the Christ. An African word, KRST, Christ. We don't even know that. We think the Europeans introduced Christmas. All that was taken from the earlier world. But the Africans, having days for the gods, festival days for the gods, were left with 360 days, which they cut into 12 days of exactly 30 days each. So they had regular months. Because later Europeans took that and changed it around and took the days, the quarter into February, and took the 5 into the rest of the year, we now have no longer regular months. We have 28-day months, 29-day months, 30-day months, and 31-day months. We need a rhyme in order to remember which is which. Geometry was developed by Africans along the Nile. They took the geometry. Herophilus is credited with pulse-taking shit. Dr. Finch shows in this study of the Edwin Smith Papyrus that pulse-taking was detailed by the Egyptians. It was not caught up by the Europeans until 1,000 years later. Yet they're the father of this and the father of that, and the father of this and the father of that. It is only within this century that first comes the political revolution, which is not finished. But now comes the other revolution, more significant and permanent, the cultural or spiritual revolution. And it is important to note that these two things have to go hand in hand. We cannot advance merely by shouting big black slogans, because you may be big and black, but you may have nothing in your head. It happened in Africa, it happened with the Nigerians. Strong, powerful nation, oil and all sorts of things, seized power. And what they started doing, building all sorts of incredible white elephants. They could have transformed Nigeria. They could have transformed Africa if Nkrumah or people like that or Sheikh Antioch had that wealth at their hands and that vast country. They could have transformed the black world because they had something up here. This is the universe. The wealth of a nation is not enough. You can only transform the world if you have something in your head. It's not enough to have power.